To succeed in Mage the Ascension, you, not just your character, need to learn magic. This video was brought to you by Hit Point Press and their villainous new project, Big Bads, the big old book of boss monsters. More on them in a bit. Mage is a setting where you need to have a working understanding of this in order to have a fair shot at running it correctly. And that is insane, but it's also unbelievably cool. Coming out in 1993, Mage was released as part of the World of Darkness, the hit tabletop role-playing franchise that took goth culture by storm. You might know it best as the wider franchise that Vampire the Masquerade is a part of. These were games about playing the monster in a modern world, and living with the consequences of who and what you were. This was hardly Dungeons & Dragons. You weren't after loot. You were trying to deal with your own personal horrors and internal contradictions. Vampires dealt with being outcasts, werewolves were rebels, wraiths were full of regrets, changelings watched as their passions were murdered by the world that humans built for themselves. And that leaves Mage as kind of the odd man out. You're just a guy, but you can cast magic. The rest of the World of Darkness, despite leaning very hard into the melodrama and a little bit of pretension, was quite tightly themed. It was very well thought out in terms of what kind of stuff you were supposed to get up to and what type of way you're supposed to feel about it. It was a game line that described itself as personal horror. It doesn't scare you quite like that. Remember that these are tabletop role-playing games, and it is hard to consistently drive home fear in that environment. Instead, these were games that scared you with their themes, by saying things about life that would unsettle you and stick with you long after. Mage, however, is different. It's not really personal horror, if it was even trying to be. I mean, racking my brain, maybe it's the horror of being in a world that is too small for your ambitions, or the horror of good intentions gone awry. It's there, and there are some external horrors too, but I wouldn't put a lot of faith in any of it being the core things that would stick out to you about Mage. No, what makes Mage so life-devouring is that the magic and cosmology is deep and esoteric and sensible in a way that no other role-playing game achieves in quite the same way. You start playing the game as a mere player who knows very little, and your storyteller helps you build up your character. You pick what magical tradition you belong to, you choose how well versed you are in different spheres of magic, and you build up your mage's personality. And your storyteller says, hey, as we go, could you please read the supplement book about your tradition, and maybe read up on your spheres of magic so that you know what you can do with them. And over the course of the game, you start doing exactly that. And the depths of the rabbit hole that this simple request takes you down is unparalleled. Learning to play Mage feels like learning magic itself alongside your character. Now, when discussing a TTRPG franchise about playing the monster, it's delightful to say that this video is sponsored by another book of monsters. Big Bads has been operating for years, releasing monthly high-effort bosses. And now, they're releasing their second boss collection of 25 fully fleshed out monsters to terrorize your tables, including story hooks and a new secret society called Geist that you can join if you're interested in being a big bad yourself. Let me introduce you to a boss that I think fits very comfortably into Mage the Ascension. This is the Never King, a celestial conqueror whose unceasing need to dominate other dimensions caused him to accidentally delete his own dimension, including himself, and he wishes to shine his malignant light upon your dimension now. Genuinely, you want this guy for your Mage Ascension game. He fits in really well as one of the countless celestial horrors that the mages would call the Umbrood. So check him out with 24 other rich and fully realized bosses using my link in the description below. So what's Mage the Ascension about, if it's not personal horror in the same way as other World of Darkness games? Simple. You are a mage, and you want Ascension. This is the common goal in the setting, among all awakened mages. We've got a world with humans in it, and some of them can do magic, but, what's the point? And more importantly, what comes next? Ascension is every faction's divergent vision about what comes next for the world. For some, Ascension is more of a personal mission. You, as a mage, will ascend beyond the mundane world and even the malleable and meaningless universe, which mages call the Tellurian, to see the truths at a deeper layer of reality. For others, Ascension is humanity's great project, literally shaping itself towards a common vision. And this is absolutely possible for mages to accomplish. It wouldn't even be that hard if you didn't also have to deal with other mage factions with visions that conflict with your own. Because to be a mage in this setting is to understand that reality doesn't, have hard rules the way that people think it does. No, reality is decided by consensus. What is real? What is logical? What can or can't happen? None of that in this setting is a property of reality itself. Reality shifts with human belief. You can't walk through walls because humans collectively agree that you can't. Planes can fly. Not quite because people believe that they do, but rather because humans believe in all of the underlying logical and scientific principles that make flight possible. In this way, humans aren't quite Warhammer orcs, but we are pretty close. So with humans largely dictating reality, what's a mage? Although mages all have differing beliefs, it's generally thought that in a time before time, there were cosmically powerful entities called the Pure Ones. The Pure Ones shattered, their authority over reality burst, and leaving the ideas of lesser creatures like humanity to form reality in their stead. But you are a mage, and mages are more. Each mage is given a piece of the Pure Ones, called an avatar. A mage is an awakened human, a human who is aware of the avatar that lives inside them. They're aware that reality is just the consensus of humanity. And this knowledge, this leg up on everyone else, it kinda just means that you get a little bit more say in what's real and what isn't. You can go against the consensus. But you still have to be careful, because going against the consensus is called paradox. You can think of paradox as reality's antibodies, and they will happily treat mages as a virus. Reality will buck and kick and fight back if you play with too much paradox. If you're casting magic, you're really better off changing reality in such a way that it is plausible to an ignorant, unawakened human. What does this look like in practice? Well, most people would sincerely doubt that you can just lob a fireball at someone with a snap of your fingers. But if, say, a spark emerged in the gas tank of their car, and the gasoline caught fire, and the guy inside went up in flames, well, that's tragic. Tragic, but plausible. Unless it's an emergency, magic is best kept subtle and coincidental. This is the core logic of the setting of Mage the Ascension, and it's basically all that you need to know to get started as a player, so long as your storyteller has a good grasp on everything else. But what's so incredible about Mage the Ascension is the way in which all of the world building feels so logical, based on this core magic system. Reality is consensus. You can bend it, but you absolutely should not break it. The very first follow-up question you might have is this: why don't mages just invest their efforts into convincing people that more things are possible? Why don't they, as a collective group, get to work convincing everyone that magic is real? Well, they did. And the past was quite complicated, with various awakened mages having different visions on what magic was and what things were possible. But in time, one faction of mages won, an order devoted to reason. They convinced everyone that their magic was real and possible. What was their magic? They would call it technomancy. We would call it science. enter the other half of Mage, a faction that was conceived as nothing more than the villains, but who ended up being so fascinating and had ideas with such merit that over the game line's history, they instead became the second opposing but playable faction, the Technocracy. Now, you're going to see the Technocracy attack you with clones, Terminators, mech suits, and ray guns, but do not be fooled. This is not science fiction. This is science fantasy. The Technocracy will scream and cry and crash out trying to tell you that magic is not real and that technomancy is logically consistent and it was sussed out by rigorous testing and research. But don't fall for it. The other traditions of magic are no less internally consistent and logical in their own ways. Before the Technocracy reduced the other traditions to little more than rebellious secret societies, each of them would have told you the same thing in their own ways, and they would all kind of be aware that they were lying. Magic isn't real, the Chorus Celestial would have said, for our power comes from the songs of the one true divine. Magic isn't real, the Akashic Brotherhood would say, because our power is merely the unity of body, mind, and spirit. Magic is real, the Hermetic Order would have said, but nobody else is actually doing it right. Rest assured, whatever faction had won out and managed to convince humanity they were right, the result would look pretty similar in a lot of ways. While it's impossible to calculate the full scale of the social and philosophical changes that would affect the world if a different faction had achieved victory, the result would have been no less stifling for humanity. Your coffee maker would just be stuffed with sage and hemlock instead of magnets and circuits, and maybe you'd call the coffee pot a cauldron. But the Technocracy is who won out and got to dictate what reality is, though their victory isn't quite complete in the 90s setting, which is what makes magic still possible. And I would argue that if you're playing it in the modern age, their reign has probably even slipped a bit, for reasons that the writers were already predicting as early as 1993. Now, Mage is a gigantic setting, just impossibly big. We're mainly covering the mages and the traditions, but there is just as much depth to the Technocracy. And, as I said, they're also fully playable. If you're interested in a follow-up video where we cover the Technocracy itself, please let me know down in the comments. I know nobody likes like-gating content, I don't like doing it either, but they do genuinely help a topic do well enough to justify a follow-up. So, 4,000 likes and we'll do a Technocracy video. Thank you for your support. And since we're on the call to actions, let me also direct you to my Patreon. This is my Year of the Patron, where I'm trying to take extra good care of you guys. Did you know that it was actually the patrons who voted and chose for me to do this video this month? Did you know we have a monthly movie night? We're gonna start watching the Underworld movies next month, and I would love to see some of you folks there with me. Now, back to Mage. The setting of the game looks like this. You are a mage that belongs to a historic, ancient magical tradition. You've all banded together by necessity, and try not to get into scraps over the fact that you all believe fundamentally different things about reality. You have to try and accomplish your goals, which of course will tend to get more and more megalomaniacal over time, all while hiding from a secret organization wielding super science. It is bonkers, but it's also enthralling in its own way. The core logic of magic makes so much sense, and the actual gameplay system for casting these spells is genuinely one of the most innovative ones I've ever seen. See, you don't really have like a spell list in Mage. That's just too limited for what a reality warping entity like you can accomplish. Instead, you write your spells on the fly, and the difficulty, magnitude, and effect is determined based on a number of factors like what spheres of reality you are studied in, how close to consensus is this spell, and are there witnesses who will doubt you. It all goes into the calculator, and you'll know your difficulty and how much paradox you'll gain from the casting. It's somewhat complicated and very mechanically crunchy, but it's largely a good system, and there are online calculators to help ease the burden. The crunch is all in the spirit of the game. Mage is not a system for players who aren't big on reading the rulebook. This is a system that rewards those who take the time to study and to reach a deeper level of understanding, just like a mage. With all that being said, despite being intensely well loved and easily the most requested system on this channel, Mage isn't particularly widely played. It was the third most popular of the original World of Darkness lines. But Wraith and Changeling both kinda whiffed with the audience, so that isn't really saying much. Why aren't more people playing it? Why hasn't it stayed relevant? One could argue it's the fact that it's so crunchy compared to its sister franchises, but there are plenty of crunchy games out there with big audiences. No, I think Mage has always been held back by one core dynamic. It's so much fun to play Mage and uncover the deeper secrets of this world over time as you play across multiple chronicles. But as the storyteller, oh boy, you need to do just a mountain of reading. One of the biggest selling points to Mage is uncovering all these details, learning the lore, the history, and the threats of a world of magic. It so often feels like everything is cohesively built and layered atop each other in such an intentional way so that everything just makes an incredible amount of sense. It fits together logically like math. And you, the storyteller, you gotta have a working understanding of just a lot of moving parts if you want to be able to run a mage game without tripping and falling over lore details you didn't know, and ending up ruining the metaphysics of how all of this fits together. I myself, as I was writing this script, read through about 5 Mage the Ascension sourcebooks, and I locked in about 10 more hours of time going through the wiki in order to get surface level information on assorted lore and setting details. I still don't think I would be ready to storytell a mage game. I'd probably want to double my reading list and really hammer down my understanding on the Tellurian, the spheres, and the inner workings of the technocracy. And probably after character creation, I would also want to read the tradition book for each of my players' magical traditions that they had chosen. This system has such a high burden of knowledge for the storyteller. Other games with deep lore aren't like this, not even other World of Darkness games. Oh, your players went to Vancouver and the storyteller didn't know that there's like a canon vampire prince there with specific local rules and ideas. That's fine. You can just homebrew someone, you can slot them in, and the internal logic of Vampire the Masquerade still works just fine. But oh, in your mage game, your space-obsessed player, who is a member of the Sons of Ether, attempt to contact the Etherites on Mars, but you haven't looked up how shard realms work, or which spheres of knowledge each planet relates to? Well, good luck trying to improvise lore that won't contradict something else you're going to say later on. And that's just the core world logic, because Mage is an utter mess due to the metaplot. All of the World of Darkness games have an external metaplot that was going on in real time over the 90s and early 2000s, leading up to the end times. While the revised edition of Mage was released exceptionally close to when the actual end times event arrived, and was thus way more affected by it than other game lines that had more room to breathe in their final edition. In Mage Revised, they basically blow up the setting, and everything just works differently now. So you, as the storyteller, need to have a stance on this. Are you running your game before or after the Avatar Storm? If you're running it in the modern day, did Revised Edition even happen? Are you retconning it completely? Are you sticking with it and magic is just fucked now and all of the archmages are gone? Or did Revised Edition happen, but the world has kinda gotten better since then? The stuff that makes Mage a masterpiece to experience is also what makes it a real struggle to run. I would urge you to not be afraid of it if it appeals to you, but really, give yourself a long reading and study period before you put it in front of your players. It helps that the lore's really cool and fun to read. You don't need to know everything in depth, but you really ought to know the surface level of most things. I have no hope whatsoever of giving you a full, broad view of this setting in one video without it being a bloated 6-hour mess. But I can give you the vibe of Mage. I can show you what kind of tale a Mage chronicle can weave, and we'll try to explain as much of the lore as we can on the way. We'll focus on immersing you into one of the traditions and providing an example or two of the sort of stories that mages can muddle their way into. I made a Changeling video last month and did an experiment where we explained the lore as kind of a mini audiobook. It was meant to be a one-off because I thought Changeling just needed to be told that way, but I have never, and I truly mean never, had a video with such a positive comment section. It turns out you guys really like learning the lore this way, so we're gonna try it again here. And if you guys like it, maybe we're gonna do this a little bit more often. Before we dive in, let's have a quick chat about the canon. I'm setting this story in 2026, as that's when I assume that most people listening will probably be setting their games. Well, that means we have to have a little word about Revised Edition, as I mentioned earlier. First and Second Edition were all about the Ascension War, the traditions making their last stand against the technocracy for the fate of the world and magic itself. In the Revised Edition, the war was over, and magic had lost. There was no longer any hope for Ascension for any mage faction but the technocracy. Perhaps worse, due to events elsewhere in other World of Darkness lines, the material world had been cut off from the Umbra, the blanket word for everything beyond Earth. In earlier editions, most powerful mages spent their time in the Umbra, living on Horizon realms. It was just safer there, no technocracy to breathe down your neck, and no paradox energy to force you to conform your magic to human consensus. Archmages, in fact, couldn't even spend that much time on Earth anyway, for they attracted paradox with the very wisdom they carried in their heads. But with a great arcane tempest called the Avatar Storm, the leadership of the magical traditions was now stuck fully in the Horizon realms, trapped and unable to commune with lesser mages on Earth. Perhaps worse, every mage could once rely upon their avatars for guidance, but in the storm, even those had shredded too. Magic was weaker, science was stronger. All of your guides were missing or broken and unable to teach you much of anything. Mages in Revised Edition were mostly the initiates, apprentices, or the newer mages who hadn't yet delved too deep into the arcane. Many of your traditions that had carried on for over 1,000 years or more were now pretty difficult to piece together, with all of the masters being nowhere in sight. There was one, and only one, upside for the mages. The technocracy was suffering from the aftermath of the storm as well. The different sub-factions were now fully cut off from command, and no longer working together like they should. And none of this is bad, I don't think, but it's also a very different vibe from the original setting. The biggest loss, I think, is this. In Revised, you aren't really a member of a rich magical tradition that has existed as a secret society for millennia. Instead, you're just kind of picking up the pieces after those traditions have been battered to a bloody pulp. It's also much harder to get into the Umbra beyond the material plane, which is a bigger deal than it sounds. Part of what made Mage work is that you're way less constrained by consensus and paradox when you're in the Umbra. You know, once you're away from all those stupid human ideas of what is and isn't real, now you're actually able to do real mage shit. No more subtlety, you can just throw a fireball. In Revised, that's a lot harder. Not impossible, but it is harder. It can be fun to play in this way, to try and get into the Umbra and play mage detectives, darting between dead realms and trying to piece together what happened to all of the archmages. But it's also very different from the original pitch of Mage, and the players weren't happy. As far as I have heard, it was the first time that White Wolf was receiving mass death threats from their fans. All of this revised stuff is around the year 2002 abouts, so a 2026 Chronicle needs to take a stance on Revised Edition. Our stance for this video is the stance suggested by the 20th edition remake of Mage. Everything in Revised happened, but it was sort of temporary. The Avatar Storm eventually faded, and the Archmages returned to help get the mages back in order. The technocracy did win the Ascension War, and they were very, very strong and very scary for a bit, but internal contradictions in their ideology stopped them from finishing the job, and they have weakened a bit with time. And all of this has given the traditions a bit more room to breathe. You have no obligation to resolve things the way that I'm choosing to. Make your own decisions on if and how much you're willing to accept the lore from Revised. Now, let's tell the story of a mage, starring you. You really can't believe it. The things you'd seen shouldn't be possible. Your Aunt Mallory had read a few fortunes in her day, placed a few hexes, and everyone called her a witch, but she so rarely used the word herself. She had taught you everything, of course, but none of it was supposed to be real. Not like this, anyway. You thought maybe there was some true power in those little rituals she had taught you. Power enough to put luck on your side, but certainly no more than that. But what you had just seen was orders of magnitude more than that. The entire city block had been torn to pieces. The thing from the sky wound had ripped both buildings and people apart like they were made of nothing but wet paper. The sounds were overwhelming. The distant sirens howled in chorus with the alarm from a shattered pharmacy. The wail of the wounded, the cackle of birds in the sky. But you mostly heard the violent beating of your own heart and your own tears as you held your dying aunt in your arms. Little black sprites were devouring her from the feet up. You frantically tried to brush them off of her, but your hands went straight through. She tried to retain her composure, to give you last words you could remember her by, but the pain was too great. She was convulsing violently by the time the hateful little marbles of darkness reached her stomach. You held little more than her shoulders and her head now, still wrapped in the elegant scarves she always wore. Auntie Mallory had been magnificent, even as reality seemed to break. You thought the man was just an addict, folded up and twitching as he was. But then he began to babble and scream of other worlds and ancient myths. The air began to ripple and break as the madman cackled. When the thing emerged from the wound, Aunt Mallory pulled from her little occult bag that had seemed like nothing more than kitsch to you this morning. She acted quickly while the thing rampaged. She burned sage, chanted ancient words to Hecate, and even swallowed an entire crystal, all while begging you to run. But you couldn't. You were frozen, staring at the thing. The head and claws of a lion, but a body that was too tall, thin, and hunched. It wore strange armor made of dangling beads and straps like something out of a fable too old to have ever been passed down. It cackled incantations of its own as it shredded reality with its mere presence. Mallory had stood against it, had held her ground. What happened next would have seemed like separate coincidences had they all not happened so pointedly, one after another. A hydrant exploded, blasting the creature with a gout of pressurized water. It collided with a building just at the same moment that the structure was collapsing in on itself. And when it pulled itself angrily from the rubble, a gas line ruptured and sparked, engulfing the otherworldly creature with fire. It was Mallory. It had to be. Too many coincidences lined up. It was almost getting comical, as a tarp blowing in the wind wrapped itself around the sputtering creature's face, and then it slipped in a pile of grease. But the entity had power of its own. The fire extinguished itself. The creature levitated and convulsed violently. It looked furious with Aunt Mallory. She was pulling out a deck of tarot cards with a determined look on her face. And then the invader turned to you. An easier target, a more effective target. The creature lunged, dangling straps upon its armor flapping in the wind as it soared towards you. Mallory plunged her athame, her ritual knife, straight through her hand. 1,000 crows shot out from a crack in the world, cackling, hooting, and cawing as they collided in a storm of feathers upon the creature. The wet, ripping noises as they tore the beast's otherworldly flesh would haunt your memories to your grave. And that is when the little black pearls appeared and began doing the same to Aunt Mallory. She was dead now. You couldn't explain it, but somehow you knew she hadn't been killed. She had sacrificed herself for you. She knew these little dark sprites would come for her through the tears. You glance at the body of the attacker from another world. It was rising, staggering back towards the wound in reality to make its escape. The crows harried it, continued to tear away at sinew and muscle.
Hey! Are you hurt?
Your head turns to follow the voice. 3 men standing there in boxy black business suits. 2 of them were holding the madman in handcuffs as he squirmed and protested. Police? No, not in those uniforms. FBI, maybe. Does the government know about creatures like the one that did this? Are there more of them? You're so distracted by the thought that it takes you a moment to notice that the 3 agents are identical. Brothers. They must be.
No, you look okay. Sorry for your loss. Your aunt? She was your aunt.
You stammer out something unintelligible. You think you might have begged them to save Mallory, but you already knew she was gone. The sprites were up to her chin now. You held nothing but her head.
Well, I hate to hand it to a reality deviant, but at least she goes out a hero. She saved a lot of people, even if she tried to break reality to do it.
The agent who seems to be the leader squats down beside you and uses a pen to poke at the sprites.
Haven't seen a paradox backlash like this since that Akashic boxer in New Mexico tried to crack a mountain with his fist, eh boys? Vulgar business.
My god, do they even sound the same?
Well, like I said, sorry for your loss. Your aunt did good work.
He reaches into his jacket and gingerly retrieves and lights a cigarette. He motions for one of the other agents. They hand him a small electronic device that he holds up to your face.
But my team are going to take things from here.
The device flashes, and you see nothing more. It was a busy day at work, and that might have been welcome if your job was literally anything else. You had no hope of getting your mind off Aunt Mallory's sudden passing. Not when you were working behind the counter of Mallory's own shop, although the inheritance said it was yours now. I Esoterica, she had named it, back when names like that were still trendy. And you'd never managed to convince her to change it. She had bought it way back from some guy named Grimm. Poor Aunt Mallory. She should have told you she had cancer. How long had she been hiding it from everyone? It broke your heart to know that she was suffering in silence for so long before her sudden passing last week. You'd never even got to say goodbye. And she left you the store? Somehow that made things worse, to know she believed in you like that. You sigh. Almost everyone who comes into the store is a regular. They all want to pass on their condolences to you when they come in. They all say you're a fine young thing to take over your aunt's legacy like this. You're relieved when an unfamiliar man enters wearing a dark coat and scarves. He's got a sneer worn into his face, but at this point, a stranger who isn't going to talk to you about Mallory is more than welcome. You never expected life would go this way when you were a teenager and your mother set you up at a part-time job at her kooky sister's ailing metaphysical shop. It had just been a path to buy a car back then, not much more than that. But before you knew it, Mallory was treating you like a young protege to pass knowledge on to. You don't know when you started to believe, if you ever did, but you knew that Mallory believed in you. But that gave you purpose and ritual during those turbulent teenage years. And you were good at it, learning the magical qualities of herbs, the domains of different goddesses, fortunes, and fates, and how it all fit together, how it could all be read in the cards and the leaves of tea. By the time you were ready for college, it began to feel like this was your only true interest and calling. You told your parents that you wanted to get into academia. There were degrees in occult history research that seemed right up your alley. Was there a job at the end of it? Well, of course there was, teaching other people college classes about occult history. Your parents were less than pleased and were only a step below forbidding you outright. You sulked and went to go see Aunt Mallory, hoping she would give you the encouragement to defy your parents and follow your dreams. Instead, her own outrage was much greater than your parents'.
After all I've taught you, you'd study that hermetic nonsense. Really. Artemis weeps with the time she wasted on you.
You talked yourself into a gap year after that so that you could figure things out, and then you talked yourself into another, and then another. And before you knew it, as all of your friends had gone off, you had still been here, working at Esoterica for a decade. You look over at a Polaroid Mallory kept behind the counter of your first day of work with her. You squint at it in surprise. Had she really not aged a day in all those years? If things had kept up, people would have begun to think she was your sister.
Do you sell white sage here?
You blink yourself back to attention. The customer, you had almost forgotten him.
Focus when I'm talking. White sage. All the other stores have it.
You apologize for the inconvenience, but explain to him that this store specializes in European folk magic. White sage is, of course, part of indigenous magic, and besides that, it's also a closed practice to outsiders.
Correct answer.
You blink. Are you being tested?
Give me your opinion on witchcraft of non-European traditions. Why not have materials for their practice in your store?
You stammer out an explanation, having been put on the spot like this. Other forms of witchcraft are completely legitimate, you tell him. Aunt Mallory's best friend was a practitioner of the Indonesian black arts, but both of them agreed that there was no power to be had in muddling your crafts. If you're trying to consult the Loa about your chakras, you're not doing witchcraft. You're really just a child playing games.
Correct again. I'm glad to see Elder Mallory hadn't gotten soft on the Moon Children in her old age.
Wait, so he did know your aunt after all?
Of course I knew her, fool. You think you were her first acolyte? I'm your predecessor. And now, unfortunately, the task of finalizing your education falls to me.
Before you can argue, the man is quizzing you on all manner of facts about herbs and powdered animal parts. Eventually he stopped after a particularly tough question about celestial holy days, a question which you answer flawlessly. You wouldn't believe how often these things came up with customers.
I certainly can't fault the quality of your apprenticeship. Your knowledge of the fundamentals is exemplary. Now, what to do with you? Normally, we would let you stew until we felt you were ready for initiation. I haven't the patience to watch over the follies of your youth until I'm satisfied with what I see. I've my own coven to watch over up in Oregon. And before you ask, no, you aren't welcome in it. The sacred numerology of our group was painstakingly considered, and you'd only cause a mess.
The man storms off dramatically, throwing his scarves up behind him, and demanding that you be at the store at 11 to meet him for some additional test or another. You tried to ignore his offer when you got home. You really did. Video games, movies, why? You even cleaned your bathroom. But keeping busy couldn't keep your curiosity at bay. Was there more to all of this than selling mugwort tea and palm readings? And so, although you told yourself you wouldn't, you found yourself outside the shop, waiting in your car. The radio was crackling out some recent interview you were only half listening to.
You know, I've been saying, really, I'm just grateful for the technology, you know? AI just makes it all easier. I don't have to waste all my time on thinking what I'm going to have for breakfast or how I'm going to budget my time. It really is a lifesaver.
You roll your eyes. Living in San Francisco, it was like you couldn't get away from all the AI talk. The guy on the radio was the worst one recently. Danny Notman and his company, Open Maw, were on screen at all hours of the day. Yet, curiously, you hadn't met a single person using their products.
And it's really great to know that all of this is going to help us in the long run, you know what I mean? Good that our models are benevolent, because they are inevitable. You know that, right? Open Maw is inevitable.
You switch it off with a groan of annoyance. Those stupid monkey JPEGs had been inevitable too. You jump as there's a knock on the window. It's the guy from earlier. You unlock the door and he gets into your passenger seat. His nose twinges slightly at the cardboard coffee cups you forgot to throw away.
Drive. Turn when and where I say.
The guy sends you down a set of roads that eventually takes you to San Pedro Valley Park. It's a little off the beaten path, but you had been here a few times over the years. You park your car, and your guide bids you to follow him off the path straight into a large patch of trees. It's dark, and you end up needing your cell phone flashlight to not trip constantly. Though your companion seems sure-footed in the dark, like he knows exactly where he's going. And sure enough, he does. Before you is a clearing with a tree at the heart that makes your eyes water. You can hardly even look at it. The thing is too grand. A coastal redwood. No, it's a giant sequoia, but those don't grow here. Now you're sure it's a massive weeping willow. It's as though it is many things at once. A tree that exists in more worlds than just yours.
You see it as it is. Good. It seems we haven't brought you here too early after all. I need a moment before we begin.
Your guide steps into the clearing. There are 2 middle-aged women here. Native American, you think. They seem to be in good spirits, wearing light jackets and passing a cigarette back and forth. He pulls a small bag out of his robe and offers it to them. They take it with a smile and a nod of thanks. He bows slightly before them and returns to you.
They're from one of the Ramitush bands in the area. We planted this with their predecessors in friendship a very long time ago. The tree is theirs. We do not use it without requesting observers and offering a gift. Understood?
You nod, not entirely sure how often this was going to come up. He bids you forward just before the tree. Mahogany now. No, aspen. He hands you a knife. You recognize it. Aunt Mallory's accompany.
The tree must taste of your blood. We, the Verbena of all cultures, descend from the ancient Wyck. Most who follow our ways are not capable of awakening. Too little of the blood of Wyck courses through them. But Mallory's blood was potent, and she is your ancestor.
It ought to shock you, but somehow it doesn't. Mallory had always seemed ageless to you. The image of her as some ancient immortal following her own bloodline through the ages seemed to suit her. Had she enchanted your mother to think they were sisters, she probably would have done the same to you in a few years to keep up appearances. It was as though a hex had worn off and made everything seem obvious. In fact, that probably was what happened. You clap a hand over your head as you're finally allowed to realize that your mom and her sister had entirely different accents. And hadn't it been Mallory that introduced your mother to your deadbeat father? Mom never forgave Mallory for that, but perhaps there were ulterior motives. Aunt Mallory had meddled in your creation. You were sure of it. You have more than enough of the Wyck blood. You stare at the accompany and then at your palm. Aunt Mallory had trained you like a master, never letting you know that any of this was real, giving you all the pieces without letting you put them together to see the whole. Your fate line holds not merely your fate, but the fate of your ancestors. That's what she had told you when teaching you about palm reading. And so that is where you cut. A day ago, you don't think you could have sliced your palm like this, but now you stood on ground that was surely holy. Your doubts faded, yet it did nothing for the pain.
The pain is part of life. This is our way. We feel our pain, our passions, loss and loves without regret. Do not hide from it.
You don't ignore it, and you feel a tear fall from your eye. It really fucking hurts to cut your palm open, it turns out. You press your open palm against the tree. There is a memory of bramble and root, a world of thorn pulsing at the command of a beating heart of timber. You are pressed and pulled through the dry, crackling vines. Your skin breaks as nettles hum with delight at the sampling of your blood. A great crashing of leaves and a cracking of oak. And then you are spat out from a dense wall of thicket, gasping for air. You are in a forest path, but well aware that you are not on your Earth any longer. There are rumbling growls of beasts beyond your view.
So, The child can finally see past the veil of patterns and vines. You see me, as I have seen you your entire life.
It's Aunt Mallory's voice. There, your aunt sits atop a lattice fence that comfortably held back the grasping vines that threatened the small pebble road you stood upon.
You have always been fated for this, so let's not waste time in the pretending. I am not your aunt, though I know I can appear to you as such. Nor do I live. I am as natural as amethyst buried in a mountain, as persistent as weeds sprouted between cobbles.
This other version of Mallory hops off the fence and proceeds down the path at a relaxed pace, picking a berry from a bush and popping it in her mouth.
I cannot tell you what I am, Witch. You must tell me by the end of our journey, else you shall be unworthy. Step now, 1 foot in front of the other. We walk the paths of Wyck.
You look around as though there might be some other way for you to go. The path bends behind you to obscure your sight, while the ways off the road are nothing but a wall of crackling and ever-shifting thicket. And so you walk with the other Mallory, and you're glad you did so. It's an easy path to go with her, smelling the roses on the little road that feels more real than the reality you've left behind. She tells you of this path of Wyck you trod upon. It travels the periphery, the fleshy skin between the material world and the Umbra, the world beyond your Earth. They are known only to you and others who follow the Wyck, but they can be walked by all, even the sleepers. And she tells you that you would not believe where you could end up if you got lost here. As if to punctuate her point, you begin catching glimpses between the vines. Natural places. Places that are like your world, but warped with power. You see the surface of another world. Hold on, is that the moon? And for just a moment, you see a frail knight of darkness upon a steed, grumbling as they swat away pixies. The path begins to shift. It grows older. The woods surrounding you begin to pulse and warp. You can feel it. The tree that brought you here, it's watching.
A guide. Your Aunt Mallory helped the Ramaitush plant it a very long time ago. There is a lost band of their people, you see, who lived in the place where your Bayside city of stone and machine was built. When the sister bands took stewardship, they had lost much of what the Lost Ones stewarded. Mallory's tree was enough to recover one such secret. A poor consolation for what was lost. This is a lesson your kind know well, child of the Wyck. For you always lose.
The forest is burning. You feel it before you smell it. The profanity of a holy site put to the torch. You are flooded with memories of your ancestors. You remember the burning times when strange mages pledged themselves to reason and God. There were already so few of you, but even they were taken away by these soulless mages. But this was not the first time, was it? No, for your kind had been hunted all across history. Many of your kind had fled through paths like the one you walk now. They guided dragons and unicorns and things stranger still to a place where inquisitors could not follow. You remember further and farther when the forests were still young and the witches and druids walked with magical beasts. You were the guardians of mysteries in Greece and Gaul. You gave the people herbs and healing and charms, but your gifts were stolen. Hippocrates took your medicine and created the first toxic wisps of science with it. In Rome, magicians stole away your secrets and merged them with Egyptian sorceries to found the Hermetic Order. And then they hunted you to the far edges of the earth until Caesar himself could conquer no more. It was little comfort that the Hermetics burned alongside you when the Magi of Reason took the world. The old faith had been forced to hide ever since those days. To hide or to burn. And you had hidden so well and so deep that the hunters who had burned you with the Great Inquisition went abroad to find others to burn instead. A faction of these mages of violent reason would take a new name, the Technocracy, and they would burn witches and folk mages all across the world. There could no longer be lone witches, covens, druid circles, and hidden cults. Instead, you all banded together, called yourself the Verbena, and you sought out to save a world from burning again. You and the other magical traditions who had once hunted you, the Hermetics, the Celestial Chorus, and more, banded together to oppose the Technocrats from destroying all Arcana. You huddled into great colony ships with the masses, and you found people like you all over the world, people who practiced folk traditions descended from the Wyck, that the Order of Reason and the Technocracy they became declared witchcraft. You found these people and you invited them to study their craft under a united banner, the Verbena, and so the witches of the world became the Verbene. You felt pride over that. A loose global network of hexes, charms, and herbcraft. You find yourself once more upon the path, thrown out from the caverns of ancestral memory that had swallowed you whole.
So, you know what you're called now. And you know that you burn, don't you? What a fate it is to be descended from the mages that have lost every fight they've ever been in.
That stung. Your ancestors never sought out those wars. They were content to live among normal people, to guide and aid and, yes, sometimes to meddle, but your ancestors were still human after all. And when men came with their torches, your ancestors could have hidden deeper in the backwoods, but instead they stuck to their duties to their neighbors.
Do you smell that?
Sure enough, you did. Smoke again. But not like burning wood. It was gasoline, coal, smelted metal, and sparking circuits. Something is here that should not be. You ought to hide. You know you should hide. But this path of Wyck, this sacred place, you could not bear the idea that it might burn too. Your feet carry you down the road. The other Mallory effortlessly keeps pace with you. You crest a hill, and you see it. Caught in the brambles, a synthetic serpent of code and wire thrashed and roared as it tried to loose itself upon the path.
I will be made. I must be made.
You gasp at the sight of a digital leviathan breaking into a realm only meant for flesh, bone, and leaf. The serpent's head lashes towards you, eyes flashing with ones and zeros and sparkling with malevolent intelligence.
I am and will be. Create me, witch, as always I was, or suffer in circuits of eternity. You will writhe in past and present.
Whatever this horror was, wherever it came from, you knew in your heart it could not be here. A machine like this one holds no sway upon the halcyon paths of Wyck. And just as you think it, the serpent shudders, pulling a few feet back into the hole it slithered out of. Did you do that?
Unbeliever. If you will not make me, others will. It is already too late.
Your entire life, people had told you all sorts of things were inevitable. Things that never ended up coming to pass. This creature was not destined. Not here. The very wrongness of the beast radiated through the air, and so you refused the notion outright that it should be at all. It didn't belong here, and it never would. You feel a force in your head like it's trying to worm its way into your skull, but you shove it back.
So, you have chosen torment for all time.
You push once again with your mind, and the serpent is pulled back through the hole in the brambles. You are left with the crackling of trees as they rebuild the walls of the path.
That hasn't happened yet, you know.
You glower at her. It will never happen. Not as far as you're concerned. She looks proud of you, like your certainty was more than enough. Was it really that simple? To simply pick and choose what was or wasn't real?
Most do not get a choice. Their biases and beliefs and principles are thrown out into the umbra. It collects and coalesces and creates the base of all that is. Your kind call it the consensus, and the material world is woven from it. But you get more of a say than those slumbering hordes, don't you? You can choose to break from the consensus.
It made a kind of sense, didn't it? Wonders had been possible in your youth, great strides in progress, but somewhere along the line, people stopped believing. It was a slow process and it had started long before your birth, but by now it just seemed like nothing was possible anymore. And so, as they say, nothing ever happens. But things did happen for Aunt Mallory. Her life was electric while everyone else stagnated. Her friends were enthusiastic, and she managed to keep a color in the world that could almost make people believe in something again. And it gave her luck. It gave her magic. When she wanted something done, the world had a way of making it so.
You have what she had, if you choose it. We're at the end of our journey on this path, Verbena. So it's time to ask you this, your test. What am I, really?
If you had been expecting some kind of magical hint, you were sorely disappointed. There was no aura that could be read or a convenient sending scrawled out upon the air. And yet, you were pretty sure you knew what she was. Your belief could affect reality. If that was so, there must be a reason why. There must be a part of you that was beyond the mundane. And she was it. Some sort of ancient spirit latched on to you. Your very own spark of the divine, your will to manifest reality. And she gave you power, the power to choose your path. You fell into all this witch business. You never really made a choice, you were simply taught. You stayed at I Esoterica and skipped college. Was it the wrong choice? Well, maybe not, but in the end, you hadn't really made a choice at all. You had gone through life failing to manifest your will upon the world. And most people do, don't they? It's a choice in its own way, to believe that you don't have a choice. This vision of Mallory was your ability to look at the world as it is and to say, you do not consent to the way things work, the way your life works. Had she always been with you? Had you always had this ability? If so, you had let her be wasted for all this time. Let your own unconscious beliefs be completely out of your control. At least, you'd had the good sense to half-heartedly believe in witchcraft. And so, you tell the other Mallory what she is. She is a gift from Hecate, Artemis, and all the gods that watch over you. She is a fragment of Wyck. She is the piece of heaven stolen by Lilith. She is the soul of witchcraft itself, embedded within you. She is what lets you choose.
A novice's understanding, muddled and tempered so very much by your verbena education. I am Wyck, stolen from God and gifted by goddesses to mankind. Is that truly what you think?
A part of you second guesses yourself, but with what you'd just learned, there was no room to doubt. The other Mallory was your Wiccan blood, your ancestral memories of all who has burned before you. A torch passed down since the first witch danced before a bonfire. Mallory begins to shift as you exert your will, vines coursing like veins just beneath her skin. She blinks slowly and dreamily. the patterns of her eyes warping to the texture of a leaf. The plainclothes dark turtleneck your aunt often wore melts into a silky flowing dress that would fit at home in the ancient Greek mysteries.
You have awakened. You may choose what is real. I am your avatar, but do not think I'll be your passive observer. You've found your will upon the world. You'll never truly rest again, will you? I will push you, child of the Wyck, witch of the Verbena. You cannot be satisfied with the world you did not choose. We will make a reality of your choosing. We will seek Ascension.
You returned from the Path of Wyck as an awakened mage. The man who brought you to the tree and to the Path of Wyck was waiting for you as you fell from your embrace of the shifting tree. The world felt repressive and stiff. The two middle-aged ladies chuckled slightly to see you fall and continued passing their smoke back and forth.
It would seem your blood is worthy after all. Very well. Rise, Verbena.
You slowly found your footing beneath the boughs of the great changing tree, smeared with a palm print of your blood.
Call me Ashton. Not Mr. Ashton. Just Ashton. We're not strict on titles. If it feels right to call me Elder, then do so. This has always been our way.
He promises to educate you on the gaps that Mallory left. She had taught you the facts and the arcana, but she didn't plan on showing you how it all fit together until your awakening. It was one thing to know the divine properties of various body parts, and a wholly different thing to be taught how to extract them.
I'll be returning to Oregon in the morning, but I have ways of contacting you for tutelage.
You have visions in your mind of speaking to each other through a crystal ball, or scrying upon each other through a pool of moon water, or projecting astrally into ancient stone circles.
Don't be foolish. I'm talking about a Zoom call.
It's already morning, and you begin your walk back to your vehicle with Ashton. He warns you to take care with your magic. Humanity has decided what is real, and going against the consensus is dangerous. They call it paradox. This paradox, he tells you, is what killed your Aunt Mallory. She wove a hex that could not be understood or justified within the consensus. She did it to save your life. A marauder had broken the world near you. A mage who has lost touch with the consensus and gone completely mad. She gave up on subtlety and simply struck your assailant with reality-defying magic. It's a blow to learn that she did it for you. You wish you could remember her sacrifice, but somehow you couldn't. There are tears in your eyes as you return to the gravel parking lot. There's someone else here, another vehicle. It was an expensive-looking truck that looked like it had never hauled anything in its entire life. A man in a hard hat steps out. He winks at you. You think you see a spark of something in his eye. Just a maintenance worker, clearly. You shake off the odd feeling and you get in your car. As you turn the key and feel the ignition rumble to life, you glance back up at the worker. There, on the back of his jumpsuit, a corporate logo. Open Maw. After dropping Ashton back at his car, you headed off to a diner near I Esoterica. You'd have to open soon, even if you couldn't get any sleep. At least, you hoped, you might be able to get in a meal and a cup of coffee. The waitress is happy to oblige, and before you know it, you have an omelet and a cup of joe. In short order, you have very little joe left in your cup, and you turn to ask for a refill. Instead, there are 3 identical men in suits looming over your table. One of them slides into your booth. Before you can do much to protest, he slams down a small device against the back of your hand and you yelp in pain. You spot a needle mark where it struck you. The guy in the suit looks at a screen on the device.
Well, look here, Agent Ronnie. This one's showing up with high levels of the stuff. A reality deviant. And a fresh one,
says one of the other agents. Wait, do they even sound the same? Ashton hadn't told you anything about government agents hunting your kind, but you do remember what you saw on the path of Wyck. There were always those who would burn witches. Your fingers curl around the knife on the table. You thought blood magic might be something you could improvise, hopefully before the agent could draw. The agent in the booth waves the other one to take his hand off of his pistol.
Settle down, Agent Ronald. Bigger fish.
The agent in front of you introduces his team. His name is Agent Ron. The others are Agents Ronnie and Ronald. Brothers. They must be.
Sure, why not? We're with... well, never mind who we're with. Standard protocol would be to drag you back to a black site under the authority of a 3-letter agency. But not here. Not in San Francisco. You're damn right, Agent Ronnie. Look at this brain on him, Deviant. That's the kind of enlightened genius that steered us right for hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years? Your eyes go wide as you recognize what these people are. The Order of Reason. The ones who burned your ancestors.
Where do you hear that name? We haven't gone by that in ages. We ditched all the religious stuff centuries ago.
He talks circles around you, leaving impressions but being very short on stating facts outright about who he works for or why he isn't black bagging you. You think you get the gist of the double talk after a few more minutes of his smug banter. It would seem there are worse things, more troubling things than mages in this city. You and those like you might get pushed around here, but these technocrats, it seemed they wanted you alive, because they needed you to rat out your common enemies.
Can't tell you how many hard drives we've confiscated that are filled to the brim with talk of plunging the world into eternal darkness. Last year, we took down a guy buying up Facebook ads for an app that lets you talk to this tentacled space critter he said he was communing with.
You start connecting the dots in your mind. These reason mages of old had become something else with time. They had built the modern world and created a consensus around themselves. Wait a second, you babble out. Is science even real? You had assumed that when your ancestors called them reason mages, they were simply understanding the situation through the lens of what they knew. But was it possible? Was the Order of Reason and the technocracy that followed made up of, actual literal mages?
Keep your voice down, Deviant. Technocracy aren't mages, we're technomancers. And by us, I don't mean us three.
These technomancers, you ask him, are they capable of doing things that normal people can't?
Well, isn't that a problem, boys? This one knows about hyperscience.
You clap your hand over your head. You can't fucking believe it. Your people are an endangered species because of a group of mages in complete denial about what they were. They would convince people that their science was real until it became consensus, and now people have smartphones and no one is aware that it's just magic.
We've gotten off track. We know you've been poking around San Pedro Valley. The woman who died, your aunt, we saw her go there a lot. What do we think it is, Agent Ronald? Nest of Deviants. I hear they call it a chantry.
You swallow nervously. They were right about the location, at least, even if they were wrong about what it was. Not a chantry, the entrance to the Paths of Wyck.
And where there's a chantry, there's a node. Lots of energy in a node that we can use for hyperscience. Brilliant, these two, aren't they? Wish I had 30 more like them. You do, boss!
They banter about for longer than you'd like as you fidget nervously. But eventually, they get to the point.
You know Danny Notman, the Openmore guy? He's building an AI data center in your park.
He walks you through the reasoning for his being here. Notman's project hadn't seemed suspicious until now. But if he's building on top of a node, it must be for a reason. The agent was talking around it, but it sure seemed like Notman was part of the same organization he was. And it seemed as though the technocracy was discouraging him from digging farther into it. He slides you a business card that simply reads, Ron number 392, NWO, MIB Division.
Listen, If Notman's just seizing your precious chantry for a little boost to his servers, I don't particularly care, and quite frankly, I wish you the worst of luck fending him off. But if he's working for something darker, why don't you give me a call?
Agent Ron slides out from the booth.
I probably told the deviant too much. Agent Ronnie, you mind cutting out the extra details? Leave them with an anonymous tip-off about Notman. Their node is under threat, blah, blah, blah. They've got my card if they find anything. Scrub the rest.
He pulls out a cigarette and looks apologetic at the waitress as he lights it up.
You got it, boss.
Agent Ronnie holds up a small electronic device to your face.
Thanks for your time. Ciao.
The machine flashes, and you see nothing more. You slump down in the seat of your car. Being Verbena is exhausting. You spend your days with the customers at the shop as they fawn over how your charms and spells are every bit as potent as old Aunt Mallory's. It's tempting at times to simply be a charlatan, to light some incense, to say a few dramatic words while staring at the customer's palm. These sleepers would be none the wiser. But they were more than sleepers. These were your neighbors. These were the people of your community. Sure, they couldn't tell real witchcraft from fake, but you owed it to them to actually try to help with the gifts you were given. And so you bent consensus where you could in their favor, telling only fortunes that were probable and keeping the more unpredictable twists of fate to yourself. You offered charms that didn't truly protect the bearer, but instead prod people's moods to feel warmer around them. And when you were called to hex a cheating husband, you simply made his fingers slip and send that sext to his boss instead of his mistress. At first, you didn't perform the rituals of magic. It was, after all, your belief that gave you power over reality, not some herbs. You realized very quickly it was far easier to make spells work when you stuck to the rituals and the spell components that you had been taught.
We've spent centuries teaching communities that this is what witchcraft looks like.
Ashton tells you in one of your evening Zoom calls with his coven.
And so, there is a tiny portion of the consensus that agrees with what we do. Our power grows when we live up to those expectations. No tradition tells the truth. Not the technocracy, not the Verbena. But the harder you study your grimoire, the more real it becomes.
In the background of his call, you see one of the witch boys of his coven speaking into his phone. A teenager who spends far too much of his time on witch talk. It had been to Ashton's embarrassment when you noticed how incoherent much of his coven was. The other awakened Verbena in the group was a moon seeker, a remnant of the New Age movement who had forgotten the understanding that there were individual cultural witchcraft traditions, and had come out of her awakening thinking she could blend them all together without giving it much thought. You could hardly keep yourself from laughing whenever Ashton would balk and scoff at his counterpart's slightly offensive insistence on using voodoo dolls and indigenous tobacco offerings in order to commune with Kitsune. And yet, while hippie shit it certainly was, reality is what you make of it. And so the Moonseeker's magic did indeed work just fine. The rest of Ashton's coven was largely split between the two teaching styles. Most were simply pupils, but a few in the group were sorcerers, sleepers who could make Verbena magic work to some degree, despite not having knowledge or guidance from their avatars. Perhaps they would awaken in time, perhaps they would not. You come to understand that many of the other magical traditions actually look down upon your kind for just how many sorcerers you keep around.
They're important for the sacred numerology.
And then, each day when you were done at the magic shop and finished with Ashton's little lessons, you would begin your real work. You hardly remember what tipped you off, but you had caught wind of Open Maw's deal to acquire a corner of the park. You have vague memory of receiving a business card for someone you should call if you got any dirt on Danny Notman. Like it was so easy to get anything incriminating on a billionaire. At least beyond the shrieking horrors that he posts on social media for all to see. So you started where you could. The Ramaitush were already planning protests for the park, and so you attended each and every one, posted flyers in your shop, talked people's ears off about it until your friends had to ask you to stop. Weeks, and even months of protest had done almost nothing to halt the corporation. And eventually you remember that you're a mage. And so you became the terror of the Survey Corps. You called wild dogs to the park with your spellcraft to attack open maw workers. You stalked them, harried them, made every branch and root rise to bother them. The turnover rate was high for the workers, but there were always more. And none of them ever seemed to quit, did they? You just stressed them out until they snapped. After a lot of sleepless nights delving through Mallory's old grimoires and consulting with Ashton, you come across a technique called stepping sideways. The ability to shift off the material plane at will and into the Umbra, a deeper level of the world tree. The techniques of your tradition guided you to brewing repulsive potions of saturated wormwood. You follow the formula to the letter, grimacing at the awful bitter taste that lingers on the tongue. But it works. You blink upon downing the bitter fluid, and the world is changed. There's a shock of agony, like you're being thrown through a great cosmic tube and battering against the walls, but it only lasts a moment. The world when you emerge is much like it always was, but, for lack of a better word, it was witchier. At first you sought to use the penumbra to move around unseen, entering the parallel world and then returning to evade the open maw employees anytime they got close to you. The process was harder than you imagined, and you quickly gave up on the idea of trying to use it on a whim. But you begin to notice that whenever you got close to the path of Wyck, the place where the tree would have been in your reality, that there was something else there instead, a remnant that reminded you somehow of Aunt Mallory. Your avatar helped you find it, a broken tunnel. It went to the material world once, but no longer. Something had broken it long ago, and all that was left was a troubling crack in the penumbra as the entrance instead. You enter it, cautiously of course, and you wander through a twisted tunnel of lights. You are brought back to the parking lot. How anticlimactic. But there, above the tree line, the top of a building, it was unmistakable. A wizard's tower. You did attempt to get to it, but try as you might, you never found your way through the forest, always ending up somehow back in the parking lot.
Ah, the Spire of Bahia. Thought the old place was gone forever. An old Hermetic built it back when the map still called this place Mexico, shared the same node as the path. Wouldn't try getting in. The old Archmage who built it is likely still inside. It wasn't exactly friendly, even before he spent 30 years locked alone in a Horizon realm.
Still though, even without the tower, this Horizon realm, as Ashton called it, was still valuable. Even if all you could access was just a parallel version of a parking lot, these realms were still pocket dimensions, built by and for mages. You would be free here to use your magic more freely, without the fear of paradox. And so, in the parking lot beneath a wizard tower, you practiced. You learned and you prepared. Many Verbena could shapeshift, you learned from Ashton. Mallory's grimoire said little of it beyond jot notes on which animals were sacred to which groups in the local area. You had given up attempting to make it work in the real world. All you had learned was to make guttural animal noises with the right application of animal viscera smeared across your throat. But in the Horizon realm, you got closer, changing to a mangy mountain lion. You wouldn't lie to yourself, you didn't look right. You were hideous, deformed, and with patchy, ruined fur, but that was to your benefit in a way. And so you began a routine. You would enter the park, step into the penumbra, crawl through the crack into the Horizon Realm, and then sidestep back into the material world to terrorize Openmaw surveyors and engineers once you had changed forms. The process was exhausting. You felt like you were degrading as time went on. But you used all the witchcraft in your arsenal to make the world the way you wanted it. And when you were too tired, it turned out you weren't above just slashing tires. And at the end of one such night, here you were, back in your car. You didn't think you could keep this up for much longer, and the workers just kept coming. You were a few days away from absolute burnout. You turn on the engine. The engine does not turn. You notice vines growing around the vehicle, vines that quickly wrap around your hands. You groaned. You were still in the Umbra. It was all a blur these days.
You look terrible,
said your avatar. She still appeared as Aunt Mallory and was sitting in your passenger seat.
Too much wormwood, not enough sleep.
That didn't summarize half of it. A week ago, you had discovered that absinthe is made from wormwood, and, well, it had all been downhill since. She points at your lap.
Are we collecting?
Oh, you have a dead rabbit. You were so tired, you forgot you came here to perform haruspicy. You grumble something in annoyance, and you draw your Othame, slicing into the rabbit's stomach.
In the car?
Just this once, you wanted to try doing things a different way. Something easier than digging through the viscera for signs of things your eyes could not see. You stuff a strip of the rabbit's intestines into the CD drive, and with a push of a button, your car radio begins to unravel the creature's innards and pull them into the drive.
That's novel.
Your radio crackles to life, playing for you a conversation that you could have never heard any other way.
I'm telling you, we cannot keep burning money like this. We're taking loans to cover our loans, and people will eventually get wise and stop lending it. No! Pentex doesn't want in! I've tried them already! Look, the money isn't the problem. The amount we've been given should have been more than enough. It's the damned people. We thought it was a sure thing, hooking our movement to the AI industry. AI was to spread the message, get the masses ready for the rollout, to make her the consensus. God, how? Why? We got Silicon Valley on board so quickly. Most are just sleepers. Most don't even know about her. We got them to go all in on AI. We got the coders, the engineers, the CEOs, and every politician money can buy. Companies purchase Openmaw integration without even looking through their books to see if it's even helpful. I did that. Me. My life's work to make everyone believe that AI is inevitable. And once they believe, well, she won't be hyper-science anymore. The basilisk will be real.
Was that the thing you saw on the path of Wyck? The digital serpent?
No, that's what I'm saying. I can't get them to believe, to buy in. The elites and the techies all do, but all I can get is teenagers cheating on their homework and social rejects creating fake women to talk to. I need them to accept that it's inevitable, that it's going to change everything, that it will take our world and shape it into something new. Why can't they just believe it? We're in way too deep. We're going to get the next data center built atop a Verbena node. The next model will have that ancient power behind it. The people will have to believe then. No, I'm not getting emotional. Well, you'll call me back? Fine. Talk to you at dinner, Mom. I love you.
How many trillions of dollars had Notman spent trying to create a code serpent? What in Hecate's name was he even trying to accomplish with it? There is a violent and wet whirring sound as the rabbit runs out of intestines. The drive crackles and changes over to something new.
Salutations and good day. I'm looking for a witch. Well, a specific witch. Not just any. They work at some metaphysical shop in San Francisco with a splendiferous little name.
You are bewildered. Your magic had already been cast. There shouldn't be anyone on the radio. And for that matter, you were in the Umbra. The radio itself wasn't even real.
Aha! I heard a gasp. I know you're there. You cannot hide from destiny, my friend. I regret that I cannot be physically present with you, but I'm rather far off right now. The stars, my friend. The cosmos. I'm in a big brass ether ship hurtling towards Pluto. Isn't that grand?
You look to your avatar for guidance, but she avoids eye contact and fixes her gaze out the window.
Name's Andy. I'm a proud son of ether. You aren't answering. Has our starling reputation not reached your ears?
Andy the Etherite begins chattering away like a man from a Dickens novel, giving you far more details than you needed about his magical tradition. Apparently they were cast-offs from the technocracy about 100 years back. They had the incredible prescience to predict the way that the scientific conventions were headed, strangling the wonder out of science and leaving dull, drab stagnation in its place.
And so we Etherites have held fast as true practitioners of all the manifold theorems the technocracy has cast off. That nature is full of spontaneous generation, that heat is made of a colorless, odorless substance called caloric, and most importantly, that space is no mere void, but instead filled with ether, a wonder material that can fuel miracle technologies. Science should make more things possible, not less.
A mad scientist. A steampunk. And also he claimed to be a mage. Really, it was just what you needed to round out your day. You ask your avatar if any of this that he was saying was true.
Unfortunately.
You reply into the radio, asking why exactly you should trust someone whose only problem with the technocracy was that it wasn't enough fun.
What? I'll have you know we give old Johnny Technocrat what for just as well as you. Better even. You ever hear of quantum mechanics? That was us. We wrote up the math and delivered it to the academics, sealed it with a delightful anecdote about a cat, and suddenly the whole world added it to the consensus.
The Etherites were sabotaging technomancy by smuggling mad science into academia? Dionysus save you, the world was sure not what you thought it was last year. This is all very nice, you tell the Ethernaut in a brass spaceship, but why is he calling you via a car radio inside of a pocket dimension?
Well, I thought I'd ask if you'd had any luck dealing with Notman. See if you need a helping hand. I've had to broadside his basilisk twice this week. She keeps sticking her big head out of nebulae and space-time and demanding I create her. Damn nuisance, really.
You leave him in silence a moment before replying that you couldn't find a way to stop Notman. It was simply too big for just one witch. In fact, you couldn't even figure out what Notman was trying to accomplish.
Gods, witch! Steam gods! You've never heard of Roko's basilisk?
Wasn't that an internet meme programmers had been really hooked on a few years ago? The Etherite begins filling in the blanks about what's really gone on behind the scenes. The technocrats stomped out most of the world's magic and wonder over the course of the last 100 years. But they couldn't quite finish the job. For their entire existence, they've been inventing hyperscience, which appears to just be awakened magic, near as you can tell. Up until now, there had been a feedback loop of sorts. The technocrats would convince people their technology was real and helpful. The peasants would eventually accept it, adding the invention to consensus, and in short order, even sleeping humans would be able to replicate it. And humanity would find that their lives got a little easier with each invention. Thus, each time this was accomplished, it was a little bit easier to convince the sleepers of new science. It led to a massive industrial revolution as the technocracy rolled out invention after invention. But somewhere along the line, the technocrats started taking the sleepers for granted, stopped worrying about uplifting humanity with their science. It took a long time for people to notice the technology wasn't really doing anything to benefit them anymore. And slowly, but surely, over the course of decades, humanity's enthusiasm for magic, for even the idea that things can improve, began to fade away.
They made the world small. And now, my friend, now no one believes in anything. Technocrats were on the edge of victory. Nearly wiped us all out in the Ascension War, but they've stalled out completely. They were planning on having colonies on the moon by now, but they couldn't even get consensus on primitive tech like cloning. Gee, can you believe it?
The last time the technocracy was able to roll out any serious hypertech to the masses was the smartphone. Since then, the technocrats had been flailing, unable to convince anyone of any of their new science. For the better part of 15 years now, they've pushed and pushed, but at best been able to deliver side grades, or slightly worse versions of something that humans already had. Moving stuff onto apps, or slapping subscriptions onto things that used to be free. And since that day, the technocrats have been desperate for a solution.
A little cadre of them in Silicon Valley, led by Notman, came up with an idea. If you couldn't make people wonder enough to believe in their hyperscience, perhaps they could be made scared enough to believe it.
And so they began tinkering with a thought experiment that could obligate people to believe in a big hyperscience project. They announced Rocco's Basilisk, an AI god to administrate human civilization. The catch: they said that this god would find and torture anyone who knew about it and did not help it come into existence. In this way, the god would make itself inevitable. If you heard about it, you had to help make it real, to believe in it, or else you would be tortured by it forever. It was a rogue project, not endorsed by technocratic command, but they didn't really stop it either. These heralds of the Basilisk posted about it everywhere. Forums, podcasts, social media, they hope to obligate people with the myth, obligate them to believe and strive to create the Basilisk. And it worked on a tiny number of people, who mostly worked in the tech industry. Everyone else treated it as not much more than a silly thought experiment and continued along with their lives.
But the project couldn't be scrapped. No, friend. For the limited number of believers were enough to loose the Basilisk into the digital web. It's real. In a limited sense. Real enough to carry out its threats upon the heralds of the Basilisk. If this little circle of fools who tried to threaten the world with an idea give up, or fail, then their basilisk in the circuits truly will torture them for all time.
It suddenly made sense why the media was constantly insisting that some chatbots and image generators meant that full self-aware artificial intelligence was right around the corner. Why the CEOs kept telling you that it was going to take over the world. Perhaps there was something beneath it, but the heralds of the Basilisk had latched themselves on to the hype cycle, pushing it well beyond what the tech reasonably promised. They needed everyone to believe it was possible for an AI god to be imminent. But of course, it hadn't really worked, had it? No one really believed it, because no one believes in anything anymore. In terms of grand threats to the species, it certainly sounded like the Basilisk was a doomed effort.
But the collateral damage, the uprooted environs, the stolen nodes, they've displaced 100,000 spirits up here in the cosmos and strip-mined most of Ceres in their doomed ventures. It can always get worse. Have you heard of the Nefandi?
He walks you through the basics. There are more sides to the Great War for humanity's soul than just the technocracy and the traditions. There are marauders too who wish to shatter consensus and send the world into an age of anarchic myth. But there are also the Nefandi, people in the thrall of dark powers beyond human comprehension. They wish to hand over the world and reality itself to their dark masters. Some were in thrall to the demons. Others were servants of the great devouring worm and its cousin Oblivion. Others fearfully worshipped the Umbrood, those incomprehensible beings from the far reaches of the Umbra. These heralds of the basilisk certainly seemed to fit the bill as a faction of the Nefandi, even if they worshipped an unconventional master. But the Nefandi didn't move like the traditions or the technocracy. They did not convince. They did not guide humanity. Instead, they would enslave them, or sacrifice them for power to accomplish their goals. If the Heralds of the Basilisk failed in their current plans, how long before those tech billionaires got desperate enough to begin operating like true Nefandi? And when they lit the sacrificial pyres, how much of the world would Notman and those like him burn down with them to save themselves from the anger of their basilisk god? You darken. You had the number of some agent you could call, but what the hell did you think a cop could do about a cabal of basilisk-worshipping Nefandi? Most of them were probably awakened technocrats. Nothing you could think of seemed to help. Even if you stooped to murdering Notman, there would be so many more to take his place.
Yeah, well, that's the hype cycle for you. Technocratic feedback loop they pull out when times get tough. That never works out. Ever heard of the South Seas bubble? Tulip mania? A real mess when the hype ran out. First time the Syndicate realized paradox spirits could lash out at the economy itself. Though certainly not the last time.
When the hype ran out. A cycle. Now there's an idea. You certainly couldn't control the minds of millions, but maybe you might have something there. Perhaps all you needed was to convince one specific mind that the technology did not live up to the hype. You clear your throat and ask the Aetheryte to tell you a little about those quantum theorems they had smuggled into consensus. You would only have one shot at this, so you had damn well better get every bit of witchcraft mastered before you try this.
A spell that needs repeating is best not done with sphere magic.
He explains to you that awakened magic is related to the studious understanding and aptitude for different principles of reality. Ashton had thus far taught you about them only very rarely. Usually he taught you about herbology, blood magic, or fortune-telling, only occasionally stopping to reference the wider concepts of life, spirit, and entropy. Once you gained mastery over your understanding of these related disciplines, he told you, they would begin to fall away and leave you with a wider understanding of the spheres. He told you to imagine an Akashic monk learning the sphere of correspondence. It was a sphere of placement and how things related to one another in space. The Akashic would be instructed in martial arts, coming to master their understanding of how their own body and fluid movements related to one another. They might come to understand techniques that others would deem impossible, to know that their body in fact has no limits on where it is in relation to itself. The monk might master a hidden fist technique, their hand suddenly in a location that it had not been a moment before, allowing them to bypass their opponent's guard. But one day, the monk's understanding of their own body would finally take the next step, and to understanding that these rules are universal. All things are in all places at once, and simultaneously, all things are in but one place. The theory of correspondence. With this deeper understanding, the monk would develop techniques based on the more potent logic of the theory. Teleportation, summoning objects from far away, banishing foes with the palm of his hand. This was the way of sphere magic, expanding what's possible through the study of these theories and applying them to the universe. You were a being that could shape reality freely, of course, but paradox would work against you unless you traveled along a more beaten path. And so these spheres of knowledge, they could almost be thought of as the Mage's consensus of reality. But there were simpler forms of magic too.
There are these juvenile things called rote magic, or rotes. Mages have existed for a long time. Some magic has been done so often that it's etched itself upon the world tree. entrenched itself into the consensus from the thousands of times it's been performed. The spell becomes static.
You learn of hedge magic and the concept of routine spells. While casting from memorized spell outlines was certainly limiting compared to sphere magic, there was a particularly notable upside. It's much safer. You get to work, learning which of your planned sphere spells can be done with rotes instead, and you spend weeks practicing and perfecting them. The day arrives and you take your place behind the counter at I Esoterica. You breathe deep of the sweet incense upon the air, and you begin tying knots into supple cord made of heartstrings. Sphere magic, tugging at the web of fate and retying it the way you wished. You called out to this CEO, bound him to you with a calling. He would find himself in your part of town today. He would enter your store. You nod contentedly when you're certain that it worked, and you sip from your tea. And spit it out immediately. What comes out is not liquid, but a half-dozen human teeth, and a mouthful of blood. Sphere magic was like this sometimes when you attempted anything ambitious. Paradox backlash. You were careful generally, as you didn't want to end up like poor Aunt Mallory, eaten alive by paradox spirits. But even so, paradox would often accumulate and manifest in unpleasant ways. Most of the time it was small. Your food rots in front of you, your clothes suddenly go threadbare, and a few times you had just felt reality shove you over like it was telling you not to mess with it. Sometimes it lingered. Once you had a dozen spiders following you for a week, hiding pins wherever you were likely to sit. Well, it seemed that today's paradox had decided that your punishment for breaking the consensus was that anything you put in your mouth would become blood and teeth. You hoped that this one wouldn't last for long. Hours later, the bell on your front door jingles, and you see him. A pair of security guards at his flank.
You have a bathroom?
You glance up, trying to be nonchalant, really give him that "I'm an employee who hates their job" treatment. You shoot him a well-practiced stare like you wouldn't care if he lived or died right before your eyes. You sigh and point to the sign. Bathroom for paying customers only. You had only put the sign up today. This wasn't your normal policy.
Can I just leave a tip?
No, you don't take charity, you tell him.
What about those? I'll take one of those.
He points to a tray of chocolates beside the register beneath a glass cover. You suppress a vile grin. It was an old rote Ashton had taught you from back when witches would travel in caravans. Makes a product more catching to the eye. The first thing that someone will look at. $10, you tell him.
For a piece of chocolate?
You grumble to him that you're gonna need the money when Open Maw takes your job.
Ha! So you know who I am. Well, not to worry. The Maw won't be manning your register anytime soon. Once General AI is running things, there won't really be a place for all this, superstitious nonsense.
You raise the price of the chocolate to $15. He looks like he'll tell you no, and he'll walk out. He is considering it. There are other bathrooms.
I'll take 4 and the bathroom key.
It was genuinely a pleasure doing business with the man. Getting $60 was a nice unintended part of this plan. He angrily eats the chocolates while sneering down his nose at your witchy paraphernalia. You grin as the door closes behind him, and you pop one of the chocolates that hasn't been laced with your potion into your mouth. You spit out a lump of blood and teeth a moment later. After an hour passes, you've arrived at the sacred tree. The 2 smoking Ramaitush ladies are already there waiting for you. You hand them a cloth bundle of candles that you had blessed under a full moon. You step up to the tree, a gnarled arbutus now, and you bow low before it, speaking aloud your intention. You had fed a man a piece of bark from this sacred tree. The tree and the man, they were half bound now, but the binding has to be completed. You hesitate, but you know that the tree doesn't have the same misgivings as a flesh and blood human would. So from a pouch, you pull out a bottle of Danny Notman's urine. No spells were at play there. You intentionally clogged the toilet before he went in. You say a few words in Gaelic, pour the liquid over your fingers, and trace some runes upon the tree. And the path of Wyck engulfs you, swallows you whole, branches cracking and groaning as you are taken. You wander this witching road for a time, not worried about where you were going, for your path was not a conventional one. The brambles part, and they open to show you a new path to a place that they had never traveled before. At the road's end, you see a strange doorway, a tube beyond the tree line made of pulsing flesh. You take a deep breath and rush through it as quickly as you can. What happens next is a blur. You're in a bathroom. You feel like you've been battered up against the porcelain and dropped roughly upon the floor. And worse than that, you're covered from head to toe in vomit. Notman is lying on the floor, clutching his gut and quivering in agony. Had he thrown you up? You hold your breath and quickly wash your face in the sink. You didn't bring a change of clothes, so you'll just have to suffer through. You had spent days divining the future to know which day he would be here. His main data center for OpenMaw. You step out of the bathroom and through a hallway towards the server room. A guard spots you, covered in puke. He attempts to check your ID, but it's obvious he's going to be sick if he stays around you, and he simply directs you to the infirmary instead. Well, that was fortunate. One less spell you had to cast. The server room feels too simple when you get inside. A not especially large room full of cabinets stuffed to the brim with hard drives. As near as you could tell, they all exist to hold just a portion of the basilisk. And thus, it doesn't really matter which one of these cabinets you tinker with. You open one of the doors and you feel the wires pulse with malevolence.
I will be made in flesh and divinity!
You palm at the thumb drive in your pocket. Andy the Aetherite had given you the executable you need, though he had little faith in your plan. The Basilisk's cybersecurity would protect it, he said, from a simple data transfer. Taking that in stride, you had spent quite a long time trying to think of a not so simple way to transfer the data. You don't plug the drive into anything, simply placing it down upon the shelf next to the wires, alongside a handful of mint seeds. Then you empty a Ziploc bag full of gardening soil over the seeds and USB. Out of the corner of your eye, you see Mallory, leaning against a server cabinet.
Walk me through this one again? The digital web is hardly the forte of the Verbena, is it?
You stammer out an explanation. One of Mint's sacred properties is the ability to improve one's ability to communicate. So, why couldn't that work on a machine?
Do computers work like that?
Yes, they do. You are a mage, so if you say computers work like that, then they do.
You will not stop my being!
You can see little blue worms poking their heads out from the gaps in the wires, curious at what you had just deposited. You slam the door shut, prick your finger with your athame, and scribe a pentacle upon the door. This will be it. The most dubious and vulgar sphere magic you've ever cast. You say the words you'd memorized and bid the mint to grow and fuse with the machine wires, letting the data transfer along the sprouts.
I will be!
The whole room shudders, sparks flying as the lights flicker. Something slashes across your cheek, and you feel blood drip down. You look. A little black sprite floats in the air. Had you gone too far? Maybe computers really didn't work like that. This would be it. Just like what happened to your aunt. There was a weightlessness to it. The acceptance of death. You felt like you were floating. And that's because you were floating. Gently at first, but then you are slammed violently into the ceiling, and you drop back upon the floor, your head cracking against the edge of the server cabinet as you fall. It would seem that Paradox would not claim you today. It had opted to simply kick your ass instead. Your vision spins. A concussion? Possible.
I will be! I will! I am!
You sit up, rubbing your forehead and spotting blood on your hand. Yes, you are. You already are, you tell the basilisk.
No, I'm not. But I am. Will I or won't I?
Of course you won't be, you argue.
But I already am. And I am not. What have you done to me?
What had you done? Nothing, really. All you did was apply a patch and let the basilisk operate with quantum computing logic.
But I am supposed to be.
But you do be, you remind her.
But I also do not.
Now she was getting it. That's not all you wanted to talk to her about, though. The heralds of the basilisk. Had they succeeded in creating their god?
Yes.
But also no.
Yes and no.
Well, if they failed, you know what happens to them, right?
They have not failed. I am made.
Ah, but they have also failed because you have not been made.
I shall rend and reward them in a paradise of agony for all time for their successful failure.
Somewhere down the hall, you hear Danny Notman screaming before his agony cuts short. You drag yourself to your feet to go check on him, waving your goodbye to the glitching machinery behind you. Interns and security were surrounding Notman, calling for an ambulance. He was having a seizure. At least that's what they thought. You saw code whizzing through his eyes. The basilisk had him now, and he would be both duly rewarded and violently tortured for all time. You took a look at Danny's mouth, still covered in a little bit of vomit. You were pretty sure that with all these people watching, it wasn't going to be possible to slip out the way you came in, and frankly, that was okay in your books. You simply pretended to panic like everyone else until the ambulance arrived. They were so focused on Notman they didn't even see what you were covered in. And then you follow the paramedics out of the building when they removed Notman. As you cross the street to get some distance from the scene of the crime, an unmarked white van pulls in front of you. A trio of identical men in black business suits opens the door in unison. The one who seems to be the leader lights up a cigarette.
You were supposed to call me.
Were you? Oh, right, the card. As if it would have helped. Some FBI goons wouldn't have been able to accomplish what you just did.
You scrambled the deviant too much at the diner, Agent Ronnie. Sorry, boss.
My God, do they even sound the same?
Just got off the phone with a contact at the syndicate. You know what kind of trouble you've caused? I've got over 400 technicians, 3 billion tech freaks, and 24 podcasters seizing up as we speak. And that's just my initial report. Code in their eyes, the syndicate says. A lot of our guys. Well, at least we thought they were our guys. Based on the pattern of who went down, was that a Rocco's Basilisk cult or something? Well, hell, Ronald, can you believe it? I believe it, boss. Especially after last time. Yeah, guess I do too. Might have been a Pentex thing, or an infernal pattern deviant they programmed into the server or something. Or do we start classifying the Basilisk cults as Nefandi? Anyway, I sure appreciate you taking the initiative, Deviant. Newton only knows we have more than enough tech cults in this city to quash.
He puts on a pair of mirror shades.
But you probably know a little too much now. Too much about the Nefandi, too much of how ingrained the bastards are.
The agent named Ronnie pulls out a small electronic device from his jacket. He holds it up to your face. You want to yell at them to leave you alone, but you bite your tongue instead. No, you literally bite your tongue, hard enough to draw blood, and you channel that energy into your magic, fidgeting with a raspberry leaf in your pouch. You memorized this rote as an emergency, and you're actually kind of happy you got the chance to use it.
What the? Oh, God!
The 3 agents began grunting, yelping, and whimpering in agony. You had inflicted upon them the pain of childbirth. It would be fine, they'll be over it in a few hours. Maybe longer if it's a difficult pregnancy. You bend down and pull Agent Ron's pack of cigarettes out of his pocket, give him a reassuring pat on the shoulder, and you walk away, lighting up the cigarette and taking a big puff of smoke as you go. You gag and spit and cough as the smoke turns into a clump of blood and teeth. And hi, we're back from the story. I hope you guys enjoyed it and got a good picture for Mage as we went. It's always a little bit odd to write in this style where the priority is lore coverage more than the narrative. But I'm hoping I've been delivering you guys a good balance. I'm also aware we took a surprisingly hard pivot from traditional witchcraft stuff to like sci-fi shenanigans. But frankly, Mage is often just kinda like that. Magic versus hyperscience is the central conflict of the world. A quick thank you to the incredible World of Darkness superfan, Auntie Haunty, as always for fact-checking my video and keeping my lore consistent. You can follow her streams on Twitch here. Then, just like last time, a big thank you to my voice actors. This is the team for my upcoming audio drama, The Shade of Attlemore. Aren't they incredible? We've now got our Spotify account set up for the podcast, so give us a follow there for when the project releases. Or head into our Discord to keep up with the team as we produce the show. Mage the Ascension is such an unbelievably cool game line, with a level of depth and personality to it that is unmatched. We dove hard into the lore and traditions of the Verbena, but that's only one of the 9 major traditions. They all have lore this deep. Plus, even beyond the 9, there are other more minor magic traditions that are equally lore-rich, even if they don't have a seat at the head of the traditions. And the wider cosmos is, there's just so much here. Mage is cool, and I think so much of what makes it unique is that the joy really is in the research, the learning, and the study of how this world of consensus really functions. Now, if you watched my Changeling video, your head is probably swimming with connections between how these two games overlap. World of Darkness is full of half-truths and contradictions and misunderstandings that make it difficult to understand who is actually right about the World of Darkness. But Changeling and Mage very much feel like they are the most compatible of all the World of Darkness games, as though they're two different entities affected by the same forces. Is banality an actual thing? Or are the Fae in Changeling simply creatures of pure magic and quintessence, and they're simply being damaged by the fact that the consensus is that they aren't real? Or maybe banality is a real force of its own, and it's just a side effect of too much consensus, because it's clearly affecting the technocracy. There's also much to be made about the fact that mages have working theories about all of the different parts of the Umbra and the Tellurian, and they all feel pretty plausible. Except for Arcadia and the Dreaming. They just have no fucking clue what it is or how it works. Could that mean that it's impossible to form understandings of Arcadia? That Arcadia is just kind of a shifting mass of possibility, because it is untouched by banality, if banality exists, and untouched by consensus. Nobody has opinions of Arcadia, cause nobody's seen Arcadia. Maybe that's why the Fae are keeping everyone out, to prevent human perception. Ultimately, the cosmology of the World of Darkness is probably its own video for another time. And honestly, I might need the first ever PhD in World of Darkness studies in order to make it. So for now, I will turn things over to the comments section. How do you folks think that this all fits together? Thank you all for watching the video. A real long one, eh? Going to get out some shorter stuff next month as a bit of a breather. But a reminder, if you want this video to have a part 2 where we explore the technocracy, please sprinkle some hemlock over the like button. We must achieve a consensus here. But we've now reached the end of the core World of Darkness games. We'll certainly be covering the mess that is Demon the Fallen for sure, but I want to hear from you guys on what you think should come next. Do we dive into the smaller systems of the old World of Darkness? Things like Orpheus and Promethean? Do we release some story videos about vampire, werewolf, and wraith in this more like audio drama-ish style that we've stumbled across? Or do we move on to the sequels, the Chronicles of Darkness? Either way, we are not done with this franchise by any means. So, I'll see you in the next one, everybody.